our ontological characterization of end and wholeness can only be preliminary in the scope of this inquiry. To perform this task adequately, we must not only set forth the formal structure of end in general and wholeness in general. At the same time, we must disentangle the structural variations possible for them in different realms, that is, deformalize variations which are related to beings with a defined content and which are structurally determined in terms of their being same. This task again presupposes a sufficiently unequivocal and positive interpretation of the kinds of being that require a regional separation of the whole of being. The understanding of these ways of being, however, requires a clarified idea of being in general. The task of adequately carrying out the ontological analysis of end and wholeness gets stranded not only because the theme is so far-reaching, but because there is a difficulty in principle. In order to master this task, we must presuppose that precisely what we are seeking in this inquiry, the meaning of being in general, is something that we have found already and with which we are quite familiar. In the following considerations, the variations in which we are chiefly interested are those of end and wholeness. These are ontological determinations of Dasein which are to lead to a primordial interpretation of this being. With constant reference to the existential constitution of Dasein already developed, we must try to decide how ontologically inappropriate to Dasein are the concepts of end and wholeness which initially press themselves upon us, no matter how categorically indefinite they remain. The rejection of such concepts must be further developed into a positive assignment to their specific realm. In this way, our understanding of end and wholeness in their variant forms as existentials will be strengthened, and this guarantees the possibility of an ontological interpretation of death. But even if the analysis of the end and wholeness of Dasein assumes such a wide-ranging orientation, this cannot mean that the existential concepts of end and wholeness are to be obtained by way of a deduction. On the contrary, it is a matter of taking the existential meaning of the coming to an end of Dasein from Dasein itself, and of showing how this ending can constitute a being whole of that being that exists. What has been discussed up to now about death can be formulated in three theses. 1. As long as Dasein is, a not yet belongs to it which it will be, what is constantly outstanding. 2. The coming to its end of what is not yet at an end, in which what is outstanding is, according to its being, removed, has the character of no longer Dasein. 3. Coming to an end implies a mode of being in which each and every actual Dasein simply cannot be represented by someone else. In Dasein there is inevitably undurchstreckbar a constant lack of wholeness, which finds its end in death. But may we interpret the phenomenal fact that this not yet belongs to Dasein as long as it is to mean that it is something outstanding austin. With regard to what kind of beings do we speak of something outstanding? The expression means indeed what belongs to a being, but is still lacking. Outstanding as lacking is based on a belongingness. For example, the remainder of a debt still to be paid is outstanding. What is outstanding is not yet available. Liquidating the debt as paying off what is outstanding means that the money comes in and the remainder is paid off, so that the not yet is, as it were, fills out until the sum owed is all together. Thus, to be outstanding means that what belongs together is not yet together. Ontologically, this implies the unhandiness of those pieces to be still to be supplied, which have the same kind of being as those already at hand. The latter, in their turn, do not have their kind of being modified by having the remainder come in. The persisting untogetherness is liquidated by a cumulative placing together. The being end in which something is still outstanding has the kind of being of something at hand. We characterize the together or the untogether based on it as a sum. The untogether belonging to such a mode of the together, lacking as something outstanding, can, however, by no means ontologically define the not yet that belongs to Dasein as its possible death. Dasein does not have the kind of being of a thing at hand in the world at all. The together of the being that Dasein is in running its course, until it has completed its course, is not constituted by a progressive piecing on of beings that, somehow and somewhere, are already at hand in their own right. That Dasein should be together only when its not yet has been filled out is so far from being the case that precisely then it no longer is. Dasein always already exists in such a way that its not yet belongs to it. But are there not beings which are as they are, and to which a not yet can belong, without these beings necessarily having the kind of being of Dasein? For example, one can say that the last quarter of the moon is outstanding until it is full. The not yet decreases with the disappearance of the shadow covering it. And yet the moon is, after all, always already objectively present as a whole. Apart from the fact that the moon is never wholly to be grasped even when it is full, the not yet by no means signifies a not yet being together of parts belonging together, but rather pertains only to the way we grasp it perceptually. The not yet that belongs to Dasein, however, not only remains preliminarily and at times inaccessible to one's own or to others' experience, it is not yet real worklich at all. The problem is not a matter of our grasp of the not yet of the character of Dasein, but rather the possible being or non-being of this not yet. Dasein as itself has to become, that is, be, what it is not yet. In order to thus be able, by comparison, to define the being of the not yet of the character of Dasein, we must take into consideration these beings to whose kind of being becoming belongs. For example, the unripe fruit moves toward its ripeness. In ripening, what it not yet is by no means pieced together as something not yet objectively present. The fruit ripens itself, and this ripening characterizes its being as fruit. Nothing we can think of which could be added on could remove the unripeness of the fruit, if this being did not ripen of itself. The not yet of unripeness does not mean something other which is outstanding that could be objectively present in, and with it, in a way, indifferent to the fruit. It means the fruit itself in its specific kind of being. The sum that is not yet complete is, as something at hand, indifferent to the unhandy remainder that is lacking. Strictly speaking, it can be neither indifferent to it nor not indifferent. The ripening fruit, however, is not only not indifferent to its unripeness as an other to itself, but ripening, it is the unripeness. The not yet is already included in its own being, by no means as an arbitrary determination, but as a constituent. Correspondingly, Dasein, too, is always already its not yet as long as it is. What constitutes the unwholeness in Dasein, the constant being ahead of itself, is neither a summative together which is outstanding, nor even a not yet having become accessible, but rather a not yet that every Dasein, as the being that it is, has to be. Still, the comparison with the unripeness of the fruit does show essential differences despite some similarity. To reflect on these differences means that we should recognize how indefinite our previous discussion of end and ending has hitherto been. Ripening is the specific being of the fruit. It is also a kind of being of the not yet unripeness, and is formally analogous to Dasein in that the latter, as well as the former, always already is its not yet in a sense yet to be defined. But even then, this does not mean that ripeness as end and death as end coincide with regard to their ontological structure as end. With ripeness, the fruit fulfills volendit itself, but is the death at which Dasein arrives a fulfillment in this sense. It is true that Dasein has completed its course with its death. Has it thus necessarily exhausted its specific possibility? Rather, are these possibilities not precisely what get taken from it? Even unfulfilled Dasein ends. On the other hand, Dasein so little needs to ripen only with its death that it can already have gone beyond its ripeness before the end. For the most part, it ends in unfulfillment, or else disintegrated and used up. Ending does not necessarily mean fulfilling oneself. It thus becomes more urgent to ask in what sense, if any, death must be grasped as the ending of Dasein. In the first instance, ending means stopping offhorn, and it means this in senses that are ontologically different. The rain stops. It is no longer objectively present. The road stops. This ending does not cause the road to disappear, but this stopping rather determines the road as this objectively present one. Hence ending, as stopping, can mean either to change into the absence of objective presence or, however, to be objectively present only when the end comes. The latter kind of ending can again be determinative for an unfinished thing objectively present, as a road under construction breaks off, or it may rather constitute the finishedness of something objectively present. Painting is finished with the last stroke of the brush. But ending as getting finished does not include fulfillment. On the other hand, whatever has got to be fulfilled must reach its possible finishedness. Fulfillment is the mode of finishedness, and is founded upon it. Finishedness is itself possible only as a determination of something objectively present or at hand. Even ending in the sense of disappearing can still be modified according to the kind of being of the being. The rain is at an end, that is, it has disappeared. The bread is at an end, that is, used up, no longer available as something at hand. None of these modes of ending are able to characterize death appropriately as the end of Dasein. If dying were understood as being attainen zu sein, in the sense of an ending of the kind discussed, Dasein would be posited as something objectively present or at hand. In death, Dasein is neither fulfilled nor does it simply disappear. It has not become finished or completely available as something at hand. Rather, just as Dasein constantly already is its not yet as long as it is, it also always already is its end. The ending that we have in view when we speak of death does not signify a being at an end of Dasein, but rather a being toward the end sein zu an end of this being. Death is a way to be that Dasein takes over as soon as it is. As soon as a human being is born, he is old enough to die right away. For ending, as being toward the end, must be clarified ontologically in terms of the kind of being of Dasein. And supposedly, the possibility of an existing being of the not yet that lies before the end will become intelligible only if the character of ending has been determined existentially. The existential clarification of being toward the end first provides the adequate basis for defining the possible meaning of our discussion of a totality of Dasein, if indeed this totality is to be constituted by death as an end. The attempt to reach an understanding of the wholeness appropriate to Dasein by starting with a clarification of the not yet and proceeding to a characterization of ending has not attained its goal. It showed only negatively that the not yet which Dasein always is resists an interpretation as something outstanding. The end toward which Dasein is, as existing, remains inappropriately defined by being attained. At the same time, however, our reflections should make it clear that their course must be reversed. A positive characterization of the phenomena in question, not yet being, ending, wholeness, can be successful only when it is unequivocally oriented toward the constitution of being of Dasein. This unequivocal character, however, is protected in a negative way from being sidetracked when we have an insight into the regional belonging together of the structures of end and wholeness which belong to Dasein ontologically. The positive, existential, and ontological interpretation of death and its character of end are to be developed following the guideline of the fundamental constitution of Dasein that has been attained thus far, the phenomenon of care.